Okay, so there are different forms of intelligence, and this is absolutely vital to understand what is going on. My family aren't stupid people. Their conclusions are based on perspective, philosophies, and their forms of intelligence. You know, there's things they can do that I can't do. I don't do brain surgery. I'm not big on business like my older brother. I'm not as good of a software engineer as my younger brother. So there's different understandings that people have. And so we can't just say, well, because they're not able to see this, and to us it seems obvious. To most of you it seems obvious because you actually listen to what I'm saying. You know what I mean? And you actually consider it, and you see it all put together. They get bits and pieces, and they're distracted by everything else that's going on in their lives. If this was their main interest and they were able to step outside of themselves and look at it objectively, then they would come to the same conclusions that I have. Also, one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that my dad doesn't just see things the way that white society does. Well, I wouldn't really say go as far as to say that. He doesn't just come at it from a quote-unquote civilized perspective, if you will. It's hard to describe this perspective. But he also feels like he owes something to this country. And that further complicates the situation. Now, I'm not going to go into detail, but to make a long story short, my dad came here during the Nigerian Civil War, and because he was a top student in Nigeria, at least that's what I was told at the time, this country brought him in. I'm not going to say what agencies or this, that, and the other thing. I think I've actually told the story in the past. So he feels like he feels a debt of gratitude, or there's different ways to look at it, and that complicates the situation greatly. He's not a big fan of the idea that having come here, by the good graces, by the kindness of this country's heart, being one of the few people, probably one of maybe a few hundred people in America's history, no, it's probably more than that, but who have come here, as a result of America's imperialism or their greed or their bigger agenda, their bankism, their crony capitalist agenda. He's actually one of the people who benefit from it, and he feels like, well, they were there for me in my time of need. And so, there's that. So when you consider everything, and also his philosophy being, a very non-confrontational philosophy. He'll have his views, but he's not going to go on TV and say this and this and this, no matter how much he feels like saying that, because that's not his philosophy, So, I caution you from coming to the conclusion, the premature conclusion that because he was unable to see that what he was doing to his son was wrong, that magically, he's wrong about everything else in his life, He's part of companies that are very successful, companies, and they should have been much more successful. They're very, well put together, well researched companies, So these non-conventional control mechanisms, if you will, that they're using on me, he's inclined, because of his philosophies and his debt of gratitude, if you will, to turn a blind eye to all this. And it probably fucks with his head, because there's probably a part of him that says, I wish I could go there with you, But then there's the bigger picture. There's family. A lot of us, a lot of the immigrants have family back where they come from. That's part of the story. That's why I came to the conclusion that one must forsake everything, including family, to take on the New World Order. Because I see so many people, they're doing this for their family. Or at least that's how they justify it to themselves. They say, well, I have family back home. If I do this and they cut off my supply line, my family back home might starve. And these are pretty good reasons. So you need to have the highest moral standard and to pretty much be seen as an extremist in order to take on the New World Order. That's why they attack extreme philosophies. Because it's very easy to put you in a situation In a crony capitalist society, it's very easy, where you have to choose between sacrificing everything and doing the right thing, or justifying to yourself going along to get along, to do what you can, quote unquote, to help, your friends and family and whatever. Okay? So you have to understand the differences of philosophies here. I'll go through it with you, I'll go through it with you. My mother, pretty much everyone in my immediate family is a person of principle to a certain extent. I am the extremist here. Okay, I'm the guy who says no matter what happens, you can torture me. And this is a form of torture, what they're doing. They're trying to break me and all the other targeted individuals by intensifying the stress that all of society feels. Okay, like waterboarding, torture. This is the CIA torturing people domestically. This is intelligence agencies, the government. This is the gang stalkers torturing people domestically to break them, to break their will. And so they do what they want them to do. They say what they want them to say. They behave in a way they want them to behave. It's the same idea. Nothing about gang stalking is out of the ordinary or out of the realm of what you would expect. It is exactly what you would expect. Do you think they haven't done it before? Don't be surprised when the people who do what they do what they do. Okay? Okay. So, what did it take to take on these people? What kind of a view did someone have? You look at my family, for example, and say that it is, a microcosm of society. It is a smaller, it is, you can judge society based on this group of people. Study this group of people, you can kind of tell, not accurately, completely accurately, but for the most part, you can tell why society doesn't resist. My family is an intellectual family, smart enough to see what's going on and to make a decision as to whether or not to oppose these people. Okay? You have my dad, who I just explained. I'm not going to go over that again. You have my mom. Now her father was an engineer. Her mother's very strong Christian values. You would be surprised that she did not come out like my mother. She has her own take on Christianity. Because she says things like she's only met one real Christian in her life and she's not referring to me. Fine. We don't agree about it. It goes back to what I said. We don't agree about everything. But it's pretty close when you truly look at the essence of our philosophies. There are certain places where we branch out, where I take an extremist point of view, they say, well, and they take a different point of view. Okay, and my extreme point of view, I would argue, is more appropriate. Of course, I would argue that. But of course, if you think about it, I'm the one addressing the root causes of the problem in society, nobody else. And why is that? Anyway, so she's more like, she's one of those white people that has a certain level of cultural imperialism that they don't want to admit to themselves. A lot of these people who act in a discriminatory fashion, who have certain biases and prejudices, don't see themselves that way. It's sort of like a subconscious bias. They say, well, I don't hate you because you're black. I hate you because of your inability to conform to white culture in a way that offends, that ends up offending my sensibilities. And that's what it is. I think a lot of police are like this. A lot of politicians, a lot of rich people are like this. They don't see themselves as a racist. But their behavior and their beliefs have racist overtones, to say the least. It's the same thing with people who say, well, I don't date people from this race and that race. That is racist. That's discriminating based on race when it comes to dating. Now, there's a lot of people who say just because they don't want to date the same race or a different race doesn't mean that they're racist. It means that they're racist to a certain degree. Okay? Now, you can then argue whether it's okay to be to that degree, but it's still racism. It's still discrimination, and which falls under racism. It's racist discrimination. Discrimination based on race. Now, the true Christian point of view is to not discriminate based on race. That is absolutely a Christian position to take. That is a Buddhist position to take. There's a difference between Christianity and traditionalist thought. Okay? There's a difference. There is a sincere key difference between we're all God's children and you're this, we're meant to be separate. There's a difference. Okay? There are some things in the Bible that come off as perhaps racist. But when you truly get to the meat of it, it's not racist at all. The Jews, in fact, before even Jesus came, were assimilating other ethnic groups into their people. They would go places and they would conquer people and they would take them as wives. When you take someone as a wife, right, you have children, and now they're Jews as well. So they're assimilating people. They had a multicultural society in a way, well, multi-ethnic society, a multiracial society, if you will, as they were assimilating people as they made their way to Canaan and made it Israel. So there's a difference, okay? Now, me personally, my personal view is that you shouldn't discriminate on race. With that being said, when it comes to dating or anything else, with that being said, there are times when it is more practical to discriminate on race. For example, if you're going to have a leader of a black movement, it's probably not a good idea to have a white person or any other race that's not black as the leader. This is one of those rare instances where it's actually a good idea to discriminate on race. And also, I'd like to add that I personally do not want to see different races disappear. Okay, but I follow God first and foremost. And God says, don't care about it. Don't be racist. But, I like having Igbos in Africa. I like having Nubians, who are at least Nubian for the most part in Northeast Africa. I like having white people and Asian people. I like these different women. I like their, I don't want one world human race. But I'm not going to go as far as to discriminate or to promote racial discrimination in dating to achieve that. If you get what I'm saying. A lot of people don't understand that. So these things are very complicated issues. And I'm going to say one last thing. I do believe when white racists or white nationalists say that there's a planned multiculturalism is part of the New World Order agenda, I do agree it is part of the New World Order agenda. And I'm going to say something that you really have to think about, perhaps. Some of the things that the New World Order pushes aren't so bad. In fact, they're okay. They're just using them to, in collaboration, in concert with other elements of their plan to achieve their ultimate agenda, their end game. But by themselves, they aren't so bad. For example, not discriminating against women, in the workplace is not so bad. If you have an accurate way to determine whether there's a wage gap and women are getting paid less, that's not a bad idea. They should be getting paid based on their skills. Okay, some of the things that they're pushing aren't bad. And then there's but when you put them all together and you tweak them in a certain manipulative way, then they become bad. Absolutely. When you try to force people to do what they don't want to do, and there is no higher justification for it, and you got to be very careful how you justify, how you identify that higher justification. Very careful. There's too much room for corruption and for people with God complexes and other ulterior motives to corrupt everything. Okay, so understand these things. Understand them. I'm a very, very serious guy. I understand. I'm gonna end this by saying this. I saw recently on StreetGangs.com. I guess it was part 2 of the Grandees. They're talking about, when a boxer gets in the ring, getting a broken jaw or getting hit and black eye is part of the game. A gang member getting killed and all this stuff, trying to avoid hits is part of the game. I knew everything that they have done and that they will do and that they could do to me, I have already considered. I knew they were going to sabotage my love life. I knew they were going to, before I even heard of gang stalking, I knew how it goes. I know how things go. I understood my enemy very, very well, and I proceeded anyway, because I'm a man of principle. It reminds me of Jesus, he understood he was going to get crucified, and he proceeded. Because that's what a man of principle does. And I would therefore assert that Jesus was an extremist, that Moses was an extremist, that Abraham was an extremist. And why should I apologize to a bunch of candy-ass cowards for being an extremist? Thank you.